Thank you, Chairs. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Martin. I'm an early career researcher based out of University of Adelaide. I'm here on behalf to talk about some of the work we've been doing with colleagues around LUTs and CBD. I wanted to begin by first of all thanking the ICS for the opportunity to be here today. It allowed me the chance to head up to the top of Mount Fuji a couple of days ago, which has left me with a mortal fear of stairs currently, but it's a worthwhile opportunity. I want to just point your attention to a recent systematic review and accompanying editorial that we saw a few months ago. It certainly caught our attention because it somewhat stole our march here for today, but nonetheless, we think that there's plenty left in this story. For those of you that weren't familiar with this work, it essentially centres around this concept that both LUTs and CBD are highly prevalent conditions in men, and they share an increasing array of risk factors. Coupled with the fact that LUTs tend to, on average, appear earlier in men and are more likely to lead to seeking help amongst men. Consequently, we're looking to examine whether or not LUTs can be used as a sentinel marker of CBD in men. There's not a lot of data that is out there, but the data that is there seems to be limited by a use of cross-sectional design, insufficient control of confounders, and the use of convenient samples. So given this, our aim was simply to examine the cross-sectional and longitudinal associations between LUTs and CBD in men, accounting for some of these shared factors. We use one of our EPI assets, the Floreal Male Aging Study. It's a cohort study of middle-aged to elderly men, and we use baseline and follow-up data for this to study uncomplicated LUTs in both a cross-sectional and longitudinal sample. For CBD, we use a combination of self-report and data linkage with a statewide registry, hospital registry, to define a variety of CBD outcomes. We use the IPSS to code for both overall LUTs, storage, and voiding LUTs. We're controlled for a range of covariates and confounders, and we use, hopefully, robust statistical methods. So to our results, if I can just draw your attention firstly to the LUTs data here. So here we can see that for both the cross-sectional and longitudinal models, there was an increased likelihood of CBD, for prevalent CBD and incident CBD for all types of LUTs, and this was higher in men above the age of 65. For our regression modelling, we've used some forest plots here to represent the regression coefficients, and there's a lot to unpack here, but if I can draw your attention first of all just to the modelling for total LUTs, we can see here at each step that there's an increased association seen between overall LUTs and CBD. In our final adjusted model, that corresponded to a hazard ratio of just over 3, so men with overall LUTs at baseline were 3 times more likely to have a CBD event. Of the additional LUT subtypes, really only voiding LUTs came out in most of our models. So getting back to our overall aim, we were able to show that there was indeed an independent association between LUTs, overall and voiding type symptoms, and the development of CBD in men. We think at this stage we at the very least need additional prospective data. Ideally we would be able to generate some sort of pooled individual analysis that seems to that would help get around some of these power issues that bedevil most of these questions. As the accompanying editorial, the European Urology editorial address, our group was one of the few studies that demonstrated that abdominal weight loss can actually act as a frontline improver for LUTs and other health conditions, and we'll hopefully have some more data in this space shortly, but weight loss can also obviously help improve patient response and compliance. So we believe our data and the others suggest that for men presenting with LUTs with a high CBD risk, they should at the very least be encouraged to address their modifiable risk factors, or indeed referred back to their GP or onto a cardiologist for further workup. I'd like to acknowledge our study sponsors, my sponsors today, and thank you.
Thank you. Let's open for discussion. You think erectile dysfunction, BPH, and cardiovascular disease, the same disease, aging?
Well, I think certainly that was the traditional view, that there was an inevitable part of that with aging. Part of my PhD work was looking at modifiable risk factors, and so we found that a lot of the age effect is carried up in increased exposure to these risk factors, and once you're controlled for these factors, there's very little effect of age. And in fact, most men retain, or there's a variety, but a lot of men maintain regular sexual function into older age or have moderate BPH. So we think, and that's why we tend to emphasise the modifiable risk factors, because it isn't an inevitable part of ageing that you necessarily have CVD, LUTS, BPH, ED.
In your data, you didn't show storage score, syndrome score as an independent factor. How do you explain?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It caught us surprised. We were actually thinking of the subtypes that would more likely be storage LUTS that came out in the modelling. That would reflect what Brian Capelli, a colleague of ours over in Boston through BARC, had found. We think, again, we were adequately powered, but the margins are tight. And so storage LUTS was close, but didn't come up. An additional reason may be that we did actually adjust for a lot of the metabolic factors that had previously been associated with the increased association between storage LUTS and CVD. So whether or not we adjusted them away might be a potential reason why storage LUTS didn't come up in our condition. But again, I think an individual pooled level analysis would help to finally address a lot of these issues.
Please, last question.
Kai Tikkinen from Helsinki, Finland. Thank you for your work, and very good to have more longitudinal studies. So regarding that storage, and I guess it's quite a lot to do with nocturia. Nocturia is probably the least urological symptom, and it's part of the storage. So probably lots of this correlation, association, whatever, is to do with nocturia, I would guess.
Yes.
So sorry if I'm repetitive, so how much do you think you actually adjusted for confounding, or is there still a lot of residual confounding, which is it just so, because as a skeptical person I'm saying, okay, these are old people, they have all diseases more.
Sure. Yeah, well, in terms of whether or not we over-adjusted, I think that's possibly an issue. We had quite a heated discussion within our own team about whether or not we even apply any other adjustments aside from age. There's, I think, quite a valid argument, and that was brought up in the systematic review too, that you just report the crude associations. So I think that's possibly something that we could also report in the manuscript that's hopefully soon to come out. Again, and not to harp on the point, I think all these types of questions would be answered if we were all able to collate the various kind of cohorts, assuming there's a degree of harmonisation, and we can get into all those sorts of issues, including the specific effect of nocturia, which has also had some recent research come out in terms of its association with CVD.